Good morning. Good morning and welcome to this citizen dialogue organized by the European Commission, where we're going to have the Commissioner for Climate and Energy, Miguel Arias Cañete, and the President of the Regional Government of Canarias, Fernando Calvejo. We're going to try to have a debate here, and for that we have two elements. The first one is very easy. You have cards in your seats actually, and a pen, so you can ask any questions that you may have around this debate. Whenever you have them ready, just raise your hand, and one of the stewardess will actually collect them. And the other method for interacting, here you don't have to actually put away your mobile phones. Actually keep them with you and turn them on. And once you have your phones on, in your browser, you should write down Slido. That is spelled S-L-I-D-O. In this way, you will access a web page where you have the hashtag. The only thing that you have to add is today's date, 2103, so that every time a question is asked, you will be able to put forward your opinion, and the results will be projected in this screen and we will talk about them with the Commissioner and the President. This is the 94th Citizen Dialogue organized by the Commission. Tomorrow we'll actually celebrate the 95th in Tenerife. And this will be the third and fourth of Commissioner Arias Cañete in Spain. With other commissioners in total, we had 15 of them. We also had another series of dialogues with other high-standing representatives from the European Union. And when talking about the 27 members, we're talking about 1,554 actually events. So that is a total of 188,000 citizens. I hope that you have your mobile phones ready in order to interact. So we're going to pose the first question, which is very easy. Do you feel that your voice is heard in the European Union? Two options, A, yes, B, no. Do you feel that your voice is heard in the European Union? And the options are A, yes, and B, no. So while you're voting, we will see the percentages increase. And with the results that we obtain, we'll actually prepare the first question for the Commissioner Arias Cañete. So please take your time. Okay, it seems to be working. So we can see how the percentages change based on your opinions. I believe that we have basically tied. Well, it's still changing. This is quite exhilarating, isn't it? Okay, so we can close the voting for this first question, and then I'll ask the Commissioner, Mr. Arias Cañete. And I'm going to be honest, you know, I've been taking a look at some other citizens' debates, and I think that the result is very easy for you this morning. 51% of the people present feel that their voice is actually heard in the European Union. Well, this is a result that is very surprising, and the reason for that is that when we prepare our Eurobarometers, the European average of citizens that feel that they are heard is 49%. But the average in Spain is 39%, so we're quite below the European average in terms of whether the citizen feels that he or she is being heard in the European Union. So this result for me is the first time that I see it, and thus I feel that this is a result that shows a series of things. More than anything, that in this particular region, in the Canary Islands, from the very beginning, you have been able to defend, from the moment when we entered the European community, we have been able to defend the interests of the Canary Islands. It's been very active, starting by the lobby of the banana, of the Canary Islands banana, that has always been very active in defending their interests, starting with the development of the POSEI program, starting with the acknowledgement of their specific circumstances, both in taxes and in situation of territorial, so that they feel that they're being heard. I wish that was the case for every different territory of Spain, but that is not the case. And President Juncker has requested us, all the different commissioners, to be permanently present at the different parliaments. We have gone to more than 893 national parliaments, to meet with them in 893 times we've done this, so that we have been able to get to be in direct contact with 188,000 citizens. But it's always good, you know, to keep on listening to them, so that we can actually channel or actually funnel their interests, because this is going to be essential for the building of the European project over the next few years. President Clavijo, I pose this question to you now, so you can assess this result, which is, as the Commissioner has said, is not that usual wherever he goes. Well, first of all, I would like to welcome the Commissioner, Mr. Cañete, to the Canary Islands. We have been able to meet at the Brussels headquarters in order to talk about energy, and I would like to congratulate him on this initiative. We are a peripheral or an outer region of the European Union, and we are very much aware of the problems of the European Union. We've always maintained a very close relationship with the European Union. We have an office there in Brussels, and most of our infrastructures, as the Commissioner was saying, actually have depended on the collaboration with the European Union, and this result that for the Commissioner is good, for us is not that, doesn't leave us such a great taste, because this has been essential. The European Union has been essential for the Canary Islands, and it needs to keep on being essential for the Canary Islands in the future. Now we're in the middle of a debate, given the possible exit of the United Kingdom from the European Union, but we want to actually defend the concept of the European Union. We know that the crisis has actually resulted in a lot of Euroscepticism, but we wouldn't be here if the European Union didn't exist. So, what I preside and all of my colleagues in my government, we are going to keep on promoting and betting on the European Union and try to promote this type of debates and this type of events so that we can actually be closer to the citizens. Well, this is your turn again, second question. And the question is, what is the most important challenge for Europe in the next few years? You have four options: A, immigration; B, the economic situation; C, Brexit; and D, climate change. So again, you can vote. Again, option A, immigration; B, economic situation; C, Brexit; and D, climate change. In this particular case, I don't think that we're going to have a tie. Or at least that's what it seems like. You can keep on voting if you're a bit delayed. So the results are quite clear. Climate change, and I'll, before posing this question to our two speakers here, I would like to remind you that you have these cards where you can write down your questions, and they will be brought to us so we can ask these questions to the Commissioner and the President. So, Commissioner, it seems that there's no question here, climate change. This is the most important challenge that the European Union is facing or will face for the next few years. Well, again, this is very surprising to me in terms of the results, because if we take a look at the European average, when we ask the European citizens, they usually put the climate change like in the third option. About 16% of Europeans actually consider this to be the most important. In Spain, in the last survey we had, it was only 10%. Here we see that we have a main worry, and I share this not only because this is part of my mandate in terms of climate and energy, but I believe that climate change is the most fundamental challenge that we have for this century, because the effects of climate change in the ecosystems, etc., in accelerating the changes in the meteorological phenomena as well, are essential. But first, we were talking about climate change, which is the first one, but the second one is migration, and that is very much tied up to climate change. Last year, we saw that part of migration was coming from war conflict, which was in Syria, but there was also problem in terms of climate in this geographical area because the agriculturists could not remain in those territories. So if we actually go above these 2 degrees in terms of climate change, the impact, the effect in sub-Saharan Africa could be spectacular. We're talking about 1.5 million of citizens. That's what we were talking about before. Now we will be talking about completely different figures. So we need to be very intelligent, very smart in terms of our policies, combining climate change and immigration. Climate change, what it tells us to do is that we need to do technological and actually an energetical transformation. So we need to adapt and to prepare for the meteorological phenomena of the future and to try to prevent them. But the difficulty of these climate policies is that they are not in the short term. You need to keep on having these actions throughout the entire century, and the next generations will need to keep on working in here because we need to take carbon out of the economy before 2050. We know that in the 27 members of the European Union, we all need to have consistent policies if we want to actually fight against climate change. And then we'll talk about this more in detail later on. But we also need to be prepared for migratory phenomena that may come as a result of climate change. So we need to work in many different areas, like in the organized management of how to access the European area, how to see how we're going to deal with the different treaties in terms of admission, what are we going to do in terms of the different origin or countries of origin of this migration, and we have certain programs in place already. We have the European Guard of our borders and coast, and they have to protect our outermost borders, actually, because we have an external border that is common, so that when the migrants come into the European Union, they come into the European Union, not just a particular state of the European Union. It's true that every once in a while we have pools of migrants in a particular country, like for instance, we needed to help Greece because we had massive entries of migrants, etc., and we had to actually help all the different countries, Greece, Spain with 800,000 euros, etc. Africa has the highest demographic growth in the world right now, and they have 800 million of inhabitants that actually don't know where to go. So we need to work smartly and to create opportunities of work in this continent. And then we need to have migrations that are organized. So those countries where we have these demographies that we have in the European Union, we're going to need to work from the exterior as well, but we need to be organized, we need to have specific quotas, etc., and we need to provide opportunities for work. So there's a huge migration policies that we need to do at the European level that is above the different European member states, and that's what the European Union wants to do. We want to have organized migrations and guarantees of the right for asylum that is well applied. And we also need to have these quotas so that they can work within the European Union. And the other aspect here will be the integration of the migrants, which is something essential, because we live in a European Union that is based on an article, which is the one that I like best, which is Article 2, that says that the Union will be based on the ideas and values of respect, equality, the rule of law, the respect for human rights, including those rights of minorities, and these are common values for all the different member states in a society that is characterized by pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between men and women. And a European Union that is based on these values needs to be a European Union that is open, but open to migratory processes that are organized and regulated and developed by through the solidarity of all the different European members or European member states. Again, I would like to remind you that you can use the different cards that you have on your seats to write down your questions. And then, Mr. President, I would like to learn of your opinion with regards to this vote, to this decision from the people present in this hall, that have placed climate change way above the different possible problems, actually real problems, that we said that the European Union is facing in the close future? Well, I would like to actually say hi to Aridane, which is the president of the scientific committee from the Canary Islands Department Against Climate Change. We believe that climate change is essential, but but the thing is, we don't have a climate. We have meteorological phenomena that are always negative, always adverse. This is going to be something terrible, because we are very vulnerable to all of these type of effects that are arising from climate change that affect our main economic activity, which is tourism. So here we have made a great effort. And then I believe that later on we'll be able to talk about the different policies in terms of renewable energies. But everything goes through smart use of resources, being respectful with the environment, and of course through this energy transition. And here we are on an archipelago that is far away, and here we are not basically in an area that all the CO2 that we're emitting right now, it comes from transportation. We're in a very small territory, so to say, with a high population density. We are an archipelago, so we have different islands that are isolated or relatively isolated, and that's why we're taking this matter very seriously. But I don't think this is the most important challenge for the European Union in the next few years. I believe that this is a world challenge for the next few years. Because if we do certain things and the other continents are not doing their share as well, then, well, we are all sharing the same world. So all of this is going to, as the Commissioner was saying, this is going to affect everything else: migration, economic situation, everything that has to do with that in this globalized society and this globalized world. And if we don't take this seriously, this could be irreversible. So you said that this is the most important challenge that we have at the world level, right? Yes. Well, because if we don't win this challenge, we're going to lose it all. This doesn't work like I just do my thing and that's it, and I don't care about the rest. That is not the way it works. And we have great examples in the world, and also very bad examples. For instance, in the US, the policies of the president are not, they don't give way to optimism. But we need to learn how to do things right and not to do the same, to make the same mistakes over and over again. But within the European context and the world context, we need to have these worldwide agreements, and we need to promote them, and promoting them in a way that the citizens know that actually we are actually promoting and supporting these leaders that are taking this challenge seriously. And again, this has to reach the citizens so that when they vote, obviously, they need to be based on this, or actually they need to look at these politicians or leaders that are actually taking this challenge seriously, because if not, this is not going to work properly. And sometimes we don't think that this is as important, or you have some other motivations when you're going to vote in any circumscription, in any district, any electoral area. But if we manage, for people who are actually leading Europe, the US, or the different world economies, if we manage for them to take this seriously, unless we do that, we're not going to be able to progress. Okay, Commissioner, is the European Union doing enough? Are we ready in order to comply with the very ambitious limits that we have established for 2030, for 2050, etc.? Can we do more? Are we doing enough? Is there anything else that you have prepared? I believe that globally the European Union, and then we'll talk about these different matters later on, but the European Union has a very clear position of leadership in terms of the fight, the global fight against climate change, based on three reasons. First, because we have our targets that are the most ambitious in terms of the reduction of emissions, the most ambitious in the world, that is reducing greenhouse gases by 50%. Then we also have all the legislation already passed in order to reach our objectives for 2030, so that we can be climate neutral in 2050, so that in 2050 these greenhouse gases emissions are zero. And then because we also have a great solidarity for those countries that are developing right now and to help them with climate change. In the year 2017, we actually devoted more than 20,400 million in order to help these developing countries. So this position of leadership, actually this places us in a position of leadership in terms of climate change, but it's also true that we only represent 9% of global emissions. So even if we manage to completely eliminate our emissions, if the rest of the world doesn't do the same, then we're going to have the same problem. That's why we're trying to unite all the different countries. We have great relations with China, for instance, and very good relationships with the part of the US that are actually aware, or actually they are pro-climate change, and they're very aware of this. When I talked to my friend in California, the president of California, they were saying that they were actually getting ready. There's California and 11 other governors, and remember that California is the 5th world economy. They have very advanced policies. They're great multinationals. They're actually trying to promote renewable energies, etc. In the US, the government is threatening to retreat from the Paris Treaty, but the reality of the US economy goes in the same line, in terms of clean energies, etc. Okay? So this is time to actually learn of your questions that you have for both the Commissioner and the President Clavijo. And I'm going to get those questions in just a few minutes. I can see them right now.
President Clavijo, one of the matters that we were discussing in this last question, one of the possibilities we gave was Brexit. Every day we wake up with something new and we go to bed with new information. But this was a last place with only 12%. So are we really ready to face Brexit with the sheer number of British people residing here in the islands? Well, this all depends on all the agreements with the UK. For us, so far, this is not good news. We are the first region to have set up a board to assess these problems. We've been working with social agents, with trade unions, with a whole series of authorities. We've been working significantly on this. So if the UK were to exit suddenly, then this would be terrible for all of us. But given that
and then the compensations for transportation to the United Kingdom could be very, very hard actually to do. If they don't remain in order to be able to keep those exports, etc. So the question also is how will the pound react to this? Because and how is that going to affect the 5 million tourists that we get from the United Kingdom? And then we have talked to the ambassador, we have talked to the person in charge of the negotiations of this Brexit from the European Union. And this has a lot to do with the legal situation of the people that are working here or there, the access to health, to the health system, and even access to housing, etc. And that is something that we don't know how it's going to happen, because every plan that we bring is rejected, but then there's no alternative. So this is going to impact us, that's for sure. It's going to impact us, and it's going to impact us negatively. So what we're trying to do is for this to be as little, to hurt us as little as possible. And since we are an outermost region, we want to have a specific status with the United Kingdom, for instance, to deal with things such as transportation, etc., so that we can maintain this, even though we know it's going to be very hard. So taking advantage of this situation, Commissioner, since you're closer to Brussels and You know, yesterday we see this delay, or this actually extension that was requested by Theresa May. What is happening here? Is this clear at all? Is this going to be a very long game? What is going to happen? Well, Brexit is very, very hard, very difficult, because when Article 50 was prepared, we never thought that we were going to use it. It's one of those articles that you put in there, and that was, you think that it's never going to be applied. But the European Union, the negotiating team led by Michel Barnier, is a great team. They have been working hard. And the deal that we have is well prepared and is well structured. So we have the different elements in terms of flexibility, additional flexibility that have been provided for the British Premier to have, you know, a deal or an organized exit, so to say. But the European Union has also been working with the possibility of a no-deal Brexit. So obviously, what we want to have is a deal, but everything that has to do with the legislation, all the different regulations, etc., everything is already prepared. Almost all of them are already finished. Even they need to be passed in Parliament, etc., but there is no problem for us to manage a hard Brexit. But right now, we are in a very tough situation, because the problem is that in the UK Parliament, there are no clear majorities, and the British Premier has no guarantees that anything that she presents to Parliament will go in one way or the other. So what we saw before is that they didn't want to have a hard exit, but they were not able to get together and finalize an agreement. Today, there was this request for this delay up to June 30th, with certain elements of flexibility, with an agreement between the European Union and the Premier, and the European Council has they have to reach a decision now. But there is a very clear problem that we are facing, that we have the European elections at the end of the month of May, and this extension that they are requesting is up to June 30th. So there are many legal and constitutional problems in order to see what happens if the European Union, they should be part of these European elections or not. You know, because what will we do? Can we redistribute, you know, the seats from the United Kingdom between the different groups in the European Parliament? What happens with the constitutions? What happens with these elections? What happens to the European Union parliamentarians that come from the United Kingdom? So we need to see what is this extension, whether this is a shorter extension, for instance, to up to May 23rd, so that we don't have this uncertainty before the European elections, and what is the actual capacity of the British Parliament to be able to pass this deal. What we want to have is an exit that is organized. We do have a set of rules that we want to have in order to guarantee the flows and the normal operation of the different, for instance, of the airlines, etc., in order to guarantee that there's not a hard fall of any currencies, because that is important for the tourist sector. And remember that this economic community is one of the favorite destinations for British tourists, so that when the European Union, we have been under government, the national government, we have been very, very coordinated. What we want to have is a negotiated deal, an exit with a deal. But here, we have to remember that the responsibility of what's going on is the British government. The European Union has been very flexible. We have negotiated a very smart agreement. We resolved this Irish border problem that we had. And now, basically, the ball is on their court. So we need to wait and see what happens with the Brexit. We don't know how many chapters we're going to have in this series until we reach the final chapter. But then we're going to move forward to a different matter. And the question is, and this is for you, Mr. President, so the Canary Islands, are they going to align or collaborate with other islands in the European Union territories in order to have like a common strategy? I understand that this will be like some specific agreements. And yes, in Lanzarote a couple of months ago, we held this meeting of all the different islands in order to talk about climate change and energy. As an archipelago, we are very much coordinated with the Micronesia and also with the other outermost regions, but we're also in contact with other archipelagos in the world because basically our problems are common and our needs are also common. So we were, Pedro, can you tell me this? Yeah, this was the Congress of Clean Energy in Islands that was held here in Lanzarote, in the island of Lanzarote. And we established a series of conclusions and items for continuity. So we're going to keep on being coordinated in all these matters. And in one that has to do with climate change, of course, but that has to do with energy as well.
The EU has started a clean energy initiative for the islands, which was launched initially in Greece and later on in Lanzarote. And so we're developing pilot projects to see how we can tackle energy classification on the islands. Currently now the island of La Palma has been chosen for one of these pilot projects, and the EU had already financed similar projects on the island of El Hierro for energy storage and things like that. But we're currently working on more sophisticated engineering to study how all of these island regions in EU can speed up their energy transition processes, because they have much more problems than the mainland, of course, because of the distance, the lack of connection, and the development capacity for certain renewable energies. So they have more difficulties which require very specific initiatives, especially bearing in mind that the European Union strategies have to reach a renewable electricity rate of 80 to 85%. That's both for islands and for mainlands. But the islands have more difficulties because we need to consider what conditions we can apply to implement this kind of percentage. So this is going to be an interesting pilot project along with others that are currently going on in the EU. Another question that we've received, and we're also working with San Martin at the moment. Sorry, as I was saying, there's another question that we've received which has to do with difficulties in processing formalities. So how can we speed up the formality of obtaining an environmental energy impact declaration? So we've said that we have to do 300 megawatts a year in order to meet these European goals. Well, we've been working a lot on this, especially over the last few years, and we've been working hard to adjust our policies. And so this has been changing a lot of the groundwork that we've been doing in the field of renewables, such as solar power panels, wind power. We've also been working a lot on considering the option of decreeing or appointing new strategies. We've been this year we achieved 180 more megawatts, but it's clear that there is a lot of work to be done and that we need to keep working towards this. And I've been talking to the Commissioner about this. About 80% of rules come from the European Parliament, and every country has to adapt them to their own systems. So here, formalities and procedures, the bureaucracy basically is difficult. And for us as a region, we've tried to overcome all these boundaries that we have, but we can't authorize a whole load of facilities for climate change unless we have the right degree of control. So we need to make sure we're not causing more damage than benefit. We do have to implement much more specific procedures than other regions. So if someone is promoting a given renewable energy facility, needs to know exactly what steps they have to follow. Because at times there are a series of aspects that have a sort of some degree of interpretation, and it's there where we have that uncertainty that problems arise. But nevertheless, I agree. And if the EU makes life easier for us, then that would be great. I think the EU is going to make life much easier for you because we've just approved a modification of the EU directive recently on renewables. And this involves, one of the main factors is simplifying all of this administrative process, especially for small projects and for specific wind power projects, for instance. The development of technology here has led to much more efficient wind turbines, and we now have to replace the old ones. Of course, this needs to be as simple as possible. We need to simplify this project, make it all organized, and make sure everything is clear on what we're doing. We also need to plan our energy strategies very carefully. We can't afford to be anarchic. We need to have a very clear procedure, a very clear climate and energy plan that contemplates the objectives of each country. We need to make sure that the transport networks are also adapted to this decentralized energy system, to digitalized, intelligent, smart systems. Of course, it's very important for the electric grid to adapt to these renewables, to new storage systems. And so all of this optimization has a certain degree of complexity, but within that complexity, we want to make it as easy as possible. So the EU is changing in an effort to make everything more easy, but of course with the same guarantees, because we're currently going for a zero carbon economy and we need to respect biodiversity as well. Here's another very direct question, Commissioner. Why does the EU not show a more decided support for developing renewable energies, especially solar power, in the Canary Islands? Well, the EU firstly supports technological development in every field, in every type of energy. But we have a technology-neutral position. We need to develop the entire energy mix. So according to Article 194, it's up to each of the member states to decide which are their energy sources and which ones they can develop. But we, as the EU, favour a regulatory framework that encourages this individual decision. So we are redesigning the electric system to make sure that it can adapt to each member state's capabilities. And we're establishing a legal framework that can help to support any type of energy, whether it's thermal, whether it's offshore wind power, whether it's photovoltaic, or onshore wind power. But our framework covers them all, and each member state needs to decide which is the most suitable for them. It's true that solar power panels are now becoming much cheaper, much more affordable, that new technologies are being developed in this field, and that the cost of renewables has dropped. And so in our renewable energy legislation, we have a new clause that establishes that based on the cost reduction of renewables, we could possibly raise our goals up to 32% of renewables for 2030. But we'll be checking that in the future. To give you an idea of where we are at the moment, the target for Spain for 2020 was 20% renewables. We're currently at 17.5%. Well, that was in 2017. So we're definitely on the right path towards achieving that 2020 goal. However, I think the 2030 goal will be more difficult, but we need to try and aim for this 2050 goal, which is going to be 50% renewables. So that's just to give you an idea of the scale that we're working on, and that the plans for the next 10 years will have to affect all of Spain's regions and every region, and we'll have to analyse which region can develop which type of technology. But technology is neutral. We're striving towards neutral frameworks, and so we need to try and develop the most efficient technologies, of course. Javier Diaz has sent us a question. I'll start with you, President. He's asking about the role of offshore wind power in the future and the energy future scenario on the islands. Please, yes, can you answer this question regarding the Canary Islands? And then I'll ask the question to the Commissioner. Well, you know that we're currently working hard on this. On your way from the airport, you will have seen the wind turbine that we have. I think this is a great opportunity for the islands. And at the end of the day, it's true that the amount of space that we have to adapt these facilities is relatively reduced, and we need to meet all these environmental requirements as well. But we hope to develop this type of renewable energy, which has a lot of potential here. I'm not sure whether it is the energy of the future or not, but what is clear is that there is an institution here that's working very hard on generating new insight in this field, and we're trying to patent and to foster these technologies and to take on a leading role within the renewable energies world. And I think definitely this will be a bright future in the Canary Islands. I'm not sure what percentages we would be talking about, but certainly there will come a time when we can't have these facilities onshore, so we will have to have them offshore, not only in wind power, but also underwater power. And does this apply to mainland countries as well? To mainland regions? Well, the issue is the following. The European Union clearly is in a leading position in offshore wind power. But the problem is the depth of the ocean. So the deeper the ocean, the more complex the floating platforms are, but they make sense in deep waters. So this is a sector that we're developing. It has a bright future ahead, and it helps us to develop other areas, such as in the North Sea, where the sea is quite shallow, so they have certain specific circumstances. But in deeper waters, floating platforms are definitely a solution that we should be looking at. And we are leading the position. As in Europe, we're leading the position. We need to, of course, diversify activity at our harbours, at our ports. This is going to generate employment, and it's going to help us develop also in environmental terms. I think the future is definitely bright in this sector. Offshore wind power is going to be very powerful in the EU. Of course, we need to establish the right transport networks, as I was saying earlier. There are certain degrees of complexity, but this is being developed very strongly, for instance, in the north of Europe, and it's giving us the ability to develop it in other regions too. So I think here technology is going to develop very quickly. Commissioner, so how have European policies been adapting in terms of the environment and energies to include specificities of outermost regions? Well, our policies at the moment are quite generic. We have the same problems as other areas. Remote areas have the same problems as others, but they're even more difficult because of the distance. So when we start our innovation programs for Horizon 2020, we need to be very sensitive about the difficulties that they have. But the more we can contribute to developing technologies and to lowering costs, the more every region will be benefited by it. We are still trying to fight this technology battle because production of photovoltaic solar panels, for instance, is now based in China and not in Europe. So let's hope that fourth or fifth generation solar panels will be produced here in the EU and that we can therefore reduce our costs. So in the outermost regions, do you listen to the problems of outermost regions when you're developing these technologies? Well, we certainly are trying to make ourselves be heard. It's true that as new countries with weaker economies come into the EU, it's often difficult for the outermost regions to be heard because our economic indicators are similar to theirs, to those countries that are entering. So we can't take anything for granted. There's a lot of work, lobbying work to be done. We need to work with the commissioners, of course. And the Canary Islands, we specifically have a lot of support from our commissioner. And working on majority percentages and working with the Euro Chamber is very important. The status that we have managed to achieve within the EU needs not to be threatened by the entry of new countries or by our distance. Technology is advancing. We're an island. We're a long way away. We have our problems. But we have universities that are also working hard. And we need to try and compete, for instance, to gain research projects. And we're competing with bigger universities. So that's one of the problems we have. And we need to work hard to defend our status and our situation. Here in the Canary Islands, we are gaining awareness. And there is a very favourable position towards the EU, and it has been like that for a long time. And we need to maintain that position, but we need to keep convincing our member state of the need to focus on outermost regions like ours, so that the European Union keeps counting on us and on our opinion. There is a new budget that's being working on at the moment, and we have seen in that budget that the European Union strategies are focusing on other projects, so we're working hard to keep obtaining resources, because the Commission is aiming to lower our income by 3.9%, but we're hoping to be able to overcome that. Well, regarding the specificities of outermost regions, for the EU, there is a very important pilot project in La Palma, which is going to help us to analyze the difficulties that the Canary Islands and other outermost regions have in developing renewables. We need to implement the right support initiatives, so we're going to be monitoring this pilot project very closely. And regarding what you mentioned about the future financial framework for 2021-2027, I have two remarks. The EU is doing the best that it can in this new period, facing older problems that it already had and new problems. We have issues with security, migration. We're fighting also against international terrorism, digitalization of the economy, innovation to become more competitive and be able to compete in a global world with countries like China, who have very aggressive policies in terms of markets. So all of this requires us to adjust our budgets. Now, within these budgetary adjustments, the budget that was least reduced was agrarian budgets and the outermost regions, which also has been reduced very slightly. But I will say one thing. We're undergoing a discussion at the moment where each member state has to establish its priorities. So if the Spanish government, encouraged by the Canary government, were to fight for stronger budgets for these outermost regions, the European Commission would not be against that, certainly. The Commission has a friendly position, and we try to establish dialogue and discussion. We have a council that works with a whole series of other authorities to reach democratic agreements. And one of the things we strive to do is to recover budgetary funding for the outermost regions. Well, that's great news. But we certainly need to lay the problem on the table and discuss it. And do you think it's Spain that has to do that? Of course, the member state, the Kingdom of Spain, has to do it, yes. Spain, of course, backed by other countries like France and Portugal, who also have regions like this, POSEI regions. Well, I think it's clear, Mr. President, what we have to do, yet we need to lobby for it. Another statement that ends with a question: the fight against climate change must be supported by universities and major laboratories. Is the EU aware of this? The fight against climate change requires a lot of innovation. Innovation is essential in order to ensure that we achieve future technologies and to overcome some of our current problems, like hydrogen, how to use hydrogen, how to transform hydrogen electricity, and to store it. We need to overcome problems with carbon. We need to decarbonize the most energy-intensive industries. We need to deal with latest generation batteries and ensure that they are produced here in Europe, because ion lithium batteries, that's a battle we've lost. That's in China and in other markets. And we need to try and make renewable energy sources more competitive and to make the citizens themselves aware of the importance of using energy more wisely and more sensibly. So in order to achieve renewable energy progress, universities are, of course, crucial, and their involvement in these new research projects and development projects are very important. We're going to see a lot of funding on the 2020 Horizon project. This program is going to focus a lot on this field. We have an innovation fund that will be managed by the Directorate General for Energy and Climate, and the fund has about 11 billion euros dedicated to innovation and to developing this innovation on the market to make them cost efficient, of course. So we're going to see a lot of resources. We're going to have the EU Invest program that will be focusing on renewables and on climate change, and that will be backed by about 650 million euros. We also have structural funds, according to which 25% of these structural funds will be used for climate and environmental action. So our financial scenario will very much be steered towards all of these goals, and universities will play a very important role. Now, what you said is indeed complicated. Some of the most efficient universities in this area are in the UK, and you can see that in lists like where it says Oxford, Cambridge, and other universities like that are leading a lot of these research projects. So perhaps our universities are less competitive, but they certainly are not falling short. They're doing a great job. They're doing a lot of work. They need to research, develop, and there needs to be collaboration between universities, businesses, and the government, because the more involved businesses are with universities and the louder the voice of our universities, the better. Patents are a very important aspect, because how much of the research projects that we carry out are actually turned into patents? We're very good at publishing information, but other countries are more efficient at achieving patents. So I think this is a very important field in which universities working in collaboration with businesses can play a very important role. And something I heard you say, Mr. President, is that there is a huge challenge of transferring the knowledge that stems from universities to the productive process and actually implementing that knowledge. Well, yes, as the Commissioner has just said, ultimately research is very important. Here in the Canary Islands, companies are not quite so powerful. They don't have their own research departments, so they need to rely on the support of our public universities. And we need to make sure that all of the research that takes place in universities is then transferred to the public, to the productive field. And there are more and more companies that are looking to universities to fund research projects and solve specific problems that those businesses are encountering in their day-to-day business. But of course, this is something that we need to work on improving, because unfortunately, so far, we haven't achieved a position of leadership in research and development. We're working on it now, and we're backed by public funds. We're also backed by a lot of very good lecturers at universities. And so there are several projects underway. There are a lot of companies supporting us now. The University of Las Palmas recently opened up a university space that has been opened up to businesses so that they can come to the university and sit next to teachers, and that will encourage this type of collaboration and all of this transfer of knowledge. It's something that we need to work on, but that we're very aware of. Pedro Ortega, the regional councillor for the industry and other departments, has been working on this, and I need to extend my gratitude to him, and I want to thank him for all of his support.
Let me please remind you that if you have any additional questions about this debate, you can actually bring your questions forward. So a very direct question, Mr. President. Or actually, Mr. Commissioner, what are the reasons for the European Union to keep on funding projects that have to do with macro ports in the Canary Islands that are not needed? I think this makes reference to a port here in the Canary Islands, but just why don't you start, Mr. President? You can explain it to the Commissioner. Well, in the island, we have two ports where we have this connection between Tenerife and the Gran Canaria island, and there's only one line that is operating in this transport, and we wanted to develop another infrastructure in the northern part of the island, and this is funded with European Union funds. But in the end, we managed to actually assigned this project 40 million euros. And this debate arose whether this is necessary or not. So when the institution, the different city councils, and the regional government were promoting, this idea for the government to resolve this problem, because it was something essential for us to be able to extend it and be better connected and to develop the north of the island. There was a series of movements, social movement, that they are saying now that this is not needed. But of course, this has already been allocated, and this is coming from European funds. And the question is whether you should make it like new ports in one island or the other. And now the regional government has changed, and they don't want it. But we actually believe for this infrastructure to be very important. We believe that this is going to develop the northern part of the island, and is going to increase the transport of both of goods and persons. And it's something that that the regional government of Gran Canaria, of the island of Gran Canaria, said, please let us know what is going to happen here, so that we need to understand what the indemnity should be for the different companies, or whatever the compensation for the companies. But right now it has already been allocated. The European Union does not decide what project, or does not say what project you need to do. Okay, so we have a plan from any of the different regions that actually complies with the different requirements, etc. What the European Union is going to do is just going to go ahead and allocate this money. But if this doesn't happen, we have a series of mechanisms for recovering these funds for structural projects. But if this is going to increase connectivity, etc., and development in the outermost regions, it makes sense from the point of view of the European Union. And now going back to renewables. And this is a question that I don't really know, but Mr. Commissioner, what economic measures are being promoted from the European Union in order for the island territories to actually have 100% of renewable energies? I don't really know what the horizon is for this. I believe it's 2030, maybe it's 2050, I don't really know. Well, it should be 2050, but is this possible? Well, we have presented a series of communications of where the European has to advance toward up to the year 2050, being aware that we need to resolve this global warming issue. So what they have told us, the people that are in charge of climate change, they have told us if we don't manage to stop this climate change below 2 degrees, or even below 1.5 degrees, the effect is going to be tremendous. The desertification in Europe is going to be incredible as well. And the intensity of growth of floods, of rains, etc., in the Atlantic areas is going to be impressive as well. So we are aware that we have a problem that we need to resolve. But the experts are telling us that the world temperatures have already been raised by 1 degree Celsius, and that is also raising 0.1 Celsius degrees per decade. So at the end of this century, we would enter in a dramatic situation in terms of the effects of climate change. As we have seen that we just had 8 out of the 10 most or the hottest summers that we had, for the past few years. And then we had floods in all of the continental Europe that are being devastating, actually. So in order to do so, according to the experts, we should decarbonize our economy. We should be CO2 neutral in 2015. And the experts saying that this neutrality, also including methane and other gases, between 2060 and 2080. So we have a window of opportunity in the world to stop global warming. And in order to do so, what they're telling us is that we need to substitute or to replace fossil-based energies with renewable energies. So we need to reach up to 85 or up to 100% of renewable energies. The European Union believes that we can reach this 85% by 2015. The goal for 2030 is 32%, but for 2050 we need to be at the level of 85%. And that requires an effort in terms of the improvement of the network, in the technologies for the storing this energy, in reducing costs so they can be more competitive. They're starting to become competitive now in terms of the fossil energies. and we can see what is happening all around the world, and it requires very ambitious policies that we are actually bringing forward right now. That's why we have changed everything that we're doing in terms of the design on the electricity markets. We have started with the different markets for emission rights. So the carbon has gone from €5 to €23 in terms of the cost of carbon emissions. So we're doing a lot of things here. And in terms of the island territories, we realize that we have a special type of problems here. We're talking about the outermost regions that are outermost and at the same time islands, okay? So that's why we have developed this initiative, which is Clean Energy for Islands. We have tried to prepare a platform where we can have all of this knowledge that we have in terms of how to move forward towards renewables in the islands. And that's why in the Canary Islands we have chosen the island of La Palma as the first pilot program in order to develop all the knowledge that is needed in order to keep advancing. But I am convinced that technological advancement and the reduction of costs, etc., are going to go much faster than the plans of the politicians. Every European Union member, they had to actually present their goals and their policies in order to be able to reach these goals that we have for 2030. We have the different integrated plans from the different European unions, and then we, with this other plan that we have for 2050, with the decarbonization, we can say the European Union is leading the policies in terms of climate change. So let's just, this is like a little twist, so to say, in regards to what we were talking about this morning. Since ground transportation is much more polluting than other types of transport, what are you doing? Well, in the beginning, the first thing that we've done is we have raised the limits for CO2 for any transportation engine, transportation vehicles. We are actually reducing or putting limits for trucks and other heavy equipment, and we're also regulating the pollution in terms of the maritime environment and in the air transport through a measure that is called CORSIA, that forces airlines to actually acquire their emission rights, to finance also reforestation type of projects and other clean initiatives in order to reduce the emissions from transport. And we have managed to reduce, in the generation of energy, we have managed to reduce emissions. We have managed to reduce emissions in many different sectors, like for instance building, in terms of heating and cooling. And then in terms of transport, actually the emissions have increased, and they're actually increasing right now in air transport. And that's why we're putting into motion all of these initiatives for zero emissions. It's clear that when we're talking about passenger type of vehicles, it's easier to regulate. It's also clear that we can reduce our emissions when we're talking about roads if we just change the type of fuel that we use. And we think that gas could be like an intermediary until we actually manage to develop other type of systems reducing global emissions. But European Union is very much aware of the fact that transport makes up 25% of the emissions, and that's why we have changed our view on this, and we have taken a look at this industry. And we have also implemented a regulation so that they have to use a certain percentage of biofuels as well. Well, President Clavijo, we have another question. They're telling us that they're insisting on implementing burning burners for waste. So, but well, this is actually kind of a fake news that we there's no plan where we're talking about burners for this waste or anything. Oh, what about in Europe? No, we're talking about circular type of economy, the waste management, etc. We're talking about something different. The decarbonation of economy requires reutilization, selection. But now we are in the circular economy, but that wouldn't be emissions. That would be waste management, and that will increment actually the pollution to the atmosphere, but that's something that we have already surpassed. only 27% of the youth voted in the last European elections. Why are the youth so disillusioned actually with the European project? And this is the last question that they're going to vote. This is the last question that we're going to have for the people here in the hall. But wait 1 second, because the youth, this is not a single or a unique type of concept. I'm going to talk about Erasmus and Erasmus Plus programs. The youth that have actually participated in Erasmus or Erasmus Plus programs, they're fully pro-European. So since they acquired this experience of being, for 6 months of education at a different university and getting together with people from other countries, they really are aware of the European conscience. But the national political debate, which is very heated, obviously tends to cover a little bit the European debate. And people don't seem to be as aware, the youth especially, to be the importance of the European Union for people living in an area with security and stability, because they were already born within this type of circumstances, because the youth right now, they're so lucky that almost from the year 1945, we've been in a peace type of period for more than 70 years, except with the exception of the wars or the conflict in the ex-Yugoslavia regions. But they don't really value this, because they haven't. This is something normal for them, but this is coming from the European Union. They cannot value the impact of the European policies on their own countries. Quite often, because the domestic politicians, when they talk about a project, they say that that is only that's their own project, and they don't talk about the European Union and their involvement in the project. When I go throughout Spain and I see the highways, I see trains, etc., I say, like, this is being paid by the European Union. So this is solidarity of the European Union, and the development of the infrastructures in Spain could not be understood without the contribution of the European Union. In terms of agriculture, we couldn't understand agriculture and the development in Spain without the common agricultural policies. And the same for many different areas. So in the end, we probably need to explain this better in order to understand the European project. And it's very important, because this will be the first voting for 22 million youth. But it's true that those that have been exposed to the European reality, they are very much pro-Europe. And then also this internet generation, it's very easy for them to access information on the different matters. But we need to talk about this European project, because it's a project of security, of freedom, etc., that is unique in the world, and we are not aware of what we have. Yeah, I fully agree with the reflections and the thoughts of the commissioner. Just thinking in the year 92, 93, in the process that we were back then, I was studying economics in university, and then there was a debate in the classrooms. But now those that are now 26 years old, they already were born into the European Union, to democracy and the right to vote. And I believe that this is a human thing, but we need to correct it. But we tend to think that every goal, every achievement has already been consolidated, so you're already looking for the next the next thing. But you don't realize that in order to be able to maintain this status, this level of development, you need to keep on fighting. This is not just sitting down and that's it. And if you're sitting down, things are not to keep on happening the same way. And we need to reflect from the basics, from the responsibility on the very moment when you're actually voting, but also when we think that the European Union is always going to be there and we can always count on the European Union. And I can tell you that the Canary Islands is actually leading Spain in terms of the number of students that we have in the Erasmus program. So maybe this actually translates as well in this feeling of respect and recognition for the European Union. But we need to reflect on the fact that the elections and the different political movements in the different member states, there's a real movement for Euro-skepticism of people that are against the European Union. And when we're reaching certain age, we need to place our hopes in the hands of the youth, and to tell them, if you're not defending this idea, there's not going to be a future for the European Union. So they need to become aware of this. So linking this, youth and not the people, those of you that are young and not that young, please get your mobile phones and vote again. Here you don't have to choose A, B, or C. Now you have to write down a word, and a word that makes reference to this. On the month of May, we'll have the next European elections. What do these elections mean to you in just one word? You can use an adjective or whatever you want. Cooperation, freedom, hope. These are the words that we can see here. Uncertainty. So the ones that are in larger characters are the ones that are most voted, right? Yes. Yeah. Future seems to be getting stronger and stronger. Yeah, it seems the future is prominent. Is that the normal answer that you get in other sessions? I think we're almost done. Yeah, and we're going to close it here. In this cloud of words, we can see the future is the one in the center and the largest one. So that shows us that is the one that that has been repeated more often by our or the people present here. So, Commissioner, why are these elections so important? I believe they're important because we are at a stage of the building of Europe where we need to accelerate the different problems that we have in terms of security, of migration, climate change, economic development, job creation, advancing towards gender equality. So all of these people, what they want is more Europe, not less Europe. So now it's very clear we need to think forward and not backwards. So the question is there a future outside of the European Union? We're in an area where we have a single currency, the euro, where we have budgetary policies that are common, that we have climate policies that are common, that we have an industrial strategy, where we have the ability to reach economic agreements with such a power that no isolated countries could ever have. Can you imagine that you could have a trade agreement with Japan, such as the one from the European Union, or the same with Canada, or to maintain a relationship with the US so that there are no tariffs or excessive tariffs are imposed? That is very different if we are not together. And then I'll go back to the origins. We have a treasure here. We have an area that is democracy, that is prosperity, freedom, etc., that we need to promote. So we need to develop many different projects. In May, the European Union will need to see where we're going to head to, where we're moving towards in the future. But this new mandate, this new legislature, is the one that needs to consolidate the project of the Europe as we know. But imagine the crisis that we had in Spain only a few years ago that had terrible effects in terms of the loss of jobs, for instance. Outside of the European Union, without the support of the European Union framework to our financial sector, etc., that would have been impossible. So when you have a project that is unique in the world, that is an example of integration, both political and economic, that we need to defend, because this is the future. Because all of this that we hear around, all of these comments, really what they bring us to is the Paleolithic. They move us backwards. I really like this sentence for President Macron where he says, in the context of these European elections, where we're going to have populism, nationalisms, and a lot of people against Europe, Macron says we cannot let the nationalists, without any proposals to actually benefit from the hatred of the different peoples. We need to actually build Europe on the pillars of freedom, future, and progress. President Clavijo, why are these elections so important? Well, the Canary Islands, we have a lot at risk here, because we have this future, this hope, this illusion, this more just type of society. We all need to think, and we all need to be critical with ourselves. And why do we have these new political movements that are going against the philosophy of the European Union? And we're probably all somehow responsible for the horizon, for these new movements to be out there. So maybe we need to accept the different decisions that were erroneous decisions adopted by the Union or the different countries. But without a doubt, there is no future without the European Union. There is no future for our people. But I want to insist for the youth, it is you that need to actually grab the future. It is you who need to build this society that is even more just. We have tried to do this with our mistakes and with our great achievements, but this is an example. But again, in the Canary Islands, we actually even more is at risk than in any other areas. Without the European Union, Spain wouldn't be the country that it is nowadays, but the Canary Islands, it would be even worse. We only need to look at other outermost regions, such as Guyana, St. Martin, etc., and see how they live there and how we live here. Obviously, with lots of problems, with a high unemployment, etc., and with many things to do. But there is no comparison, and that has to do with the European Union. And just to close the debate, I would like to learn of your global vision for this debate that we had this morning, starting with this happy news and talking about this predisposition of not to touch the funds if Spain is going to Spain, France, and Portugal. And if we get together and we lobby for this, I remember that we held this meeting with President Macron, with Antonio Costa, and President Rajoy back then in Brussels. And I requested this to President Rajoy, and we were able to meet, the three of us. And they both, actually the three of them, acquired this. They committed to this idea of not supporting any budgets that will reduce the funds that we are receiving. So this is very important. And we need to refresh and renew this agreement and this meeting that we held in Brussels. In order to conclude, I would like to congratulate you, first of all, for this debate. I would like to thank the Commissioner that, every time the Canary Islands have needed his intervention in the European Union, he has always been supporting us. And I would like to thank you here publicly, because in the presidency of this group that the Canary Islands had throughout the past few years, we've always been able to count on you with your support and orientation. And we would like to, for these dialogues and these debates, to keep on having them, for the next few years, because it's important to bring the institutions closer to the citizenship, because in this way we can defend and protect these things that we appreciate. If we don't appreciate it, we cannot do it. And then for Mr. Juncker said that in a territory where actually, have you seen any territories where the European Union have heard that, that the people are feeling that their voices are being heard? Yes. First of all, the climate change is a challenge. And the other conclusion is that, yes, people think that they're being heard. But, we are not thinking about the short term in the European Union. We are thinking of the future of the next generations. This word, future. And these people, this vote, are thinking that policies need to be ambitious and to have ambitious goals. And also that probably, and we need to tell this to the inhabitants of the Canary Islands, that these policies required to fight against the climate change, they do not have easy solutions. These are very complex problems with complex solutions. Because in the elections, you see a lot of people with magical recipes, in order to resolve all of the problems in a couple of days. The war against climate change requires strategies, it requires ambitious goals, it requires debate, it requires not leaving anyone behind, because this is going to affect every different territory. But these are very different, this difficult task, and those that say that this is going to be very easy and that you can do it in a couple of days, this is not the way. These are policies that are very complex, that where you need to have stable work in order to be able to resolve them. And in policies, when you're not thinking of the next election, but rather on the next generation, is when you manage to do great things. Because if not, you will always choose the easy solution. So thank you so much, the Commissioner for the Action Against Climate Change and Energy in the European Union, Mr. Miguel Arias Cañete. Thank you so much also to the President of the Regional Government of Canarias, Fernando Clavijo. And thank you, all of you, for being here, all of you in the social media as well. You can keep on going with these debates and using the hashtag that we have prepared especially for this. So thank you very much to all of you.